Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be turning to the topic of the environment and digging into the strategy that one major charity has devised in tackling the climate and nature crises. And later in Charity Changed My Life, we'll hear how Western Park Cancer Charity provided psychological support to one person following cancer treatment in Sheffield. But going straight into this week's main discussion, climate degradation is the greatest existential threat to our society. Just over 5 years ago, the UK government became the first national government to declare an environment and climate emergency, a term that is now normalised to describe the state of the planet. So how can the voluntary sector play its part? Last summer, we spent several episodes looking into how charities and funders can effectively respond to the climate and nature crises. So it's definitely time to revisit the issue. And this week, we're going to dig into how one charity, Girlguiding, has brought the environment to the fore in response to feedback from its members.
And we're delighted to be joined in the studio by Berenice Levenez, Director of Strategy, Transformation and Technology at Girlguiding, who is instigator of a new environment strategy for the charity. Hi Berenice.
Good morning.
And joining us from Devon is Liz Gadd, Environment Sector Leader at the think tank NPC and leader of NPC's Everyone's Environment programme, which contains resources that Berenice made use of in development of Girlguiding's strategy. Hi Liz.
A pleasure to be with you. Hello.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you both with us. So, Berenice, first of all, this is a new strategy that has recently come into the world. Could you just give us a very brief top-line summary of your strategy, what it contains, and why now was the moment to bring it in?
So the ambition of Girlguiding environmental strategy is to make sure that we protect the planet in all our actions, to empower girls to participate in resolving the climate crisis and to drive positive change in society. It has 4 core pillars. 1, to raise awareness amongst our membership, girls and volunteers. 2nd, to reduce our carbon foot emissions. 3rd, to deliver guiding in an environmentally sustainable way, what we call eco-guiding. And 4th, to change society. Why now? Because girls have been asking us to develop this strategy. I think 4 out of 5 girls in and outside of guiding have said to us, Girlguiding should do more to resolve the environmental crisis.
Thank you. And Liz, a generational shift in mindset, I think, is something that has been evidenced over the past 5 to 10 years. Younger people really concerned about the state of the environment and the direction that it's going in. How have you seen charities sort of harness that shift in mindset to reflect the fact that many young people are so concerned about the environment?
Through our work on the Everyone's Environment Coalition in NPC, the Everyone's Environment being a group of nearly 80 now charities with an interest in taking action in this space, we've seen that there's a mindset shift across all generations. And that's backed up by some really interesting research from Cardiff Uni that shows that the difference between the generations is more to do with the emotional response to climate change. There are no generational differences in beliefs about what causes climate change, what the impacts are, although you do tend to see that older groups are more likely to think that we're already seeing the effects of climate change. And if you're born any time after 1980, because of the emotional responses to climate change being quite different, the chances are that the threats of a warming planet are having a heavier emotional toll on you than other generations. And we're seeing charities respond to that call for support to help all generations shift, and a particular call for more support around mental health in younger people by adapting their strategies, their programs, their advocacy, as well as thinking about their carbon emissions. The biggest thing that all charities can do is help their people that they support to have a sense of agency, that there is something that they can do to contribute to changing society and our response to the climate crisis.
And that sense of agency, that's quite a difficult thing to create with an issue this big and this all-consuming. So can you give us an idea of what practical ways charities can contribute to that sense of agency within the people they support?
Yes, it's true. When you look at the climate crisis and wider environmental crises as a whole, it can feel very overwhelming. But each small action is what adds up to make the big societal change that we're looking for. Charities can particularly start by understanding how the groups that they are supporting are particularly affected, which is exactly what Berenice and her team did at Girlguiding. And when they understand what the particular impacts and the priorities for the people that they work with, in conversation with them, finding out their priorities, it helps to channel what action is most helpful. We're seeing, for example, that in a lot of the youth charities that we work with, young people are calling for more support with dealing with the emotional toll of climate change, from mental health support, as well as opportunities to support their learning, their understanding, their climate action. And we're seeing similar patterns across all generations.
Yeah, it's just an issue that cannot be treated on its own. It affects so many different areas of life and also charitable cause areas. And Berenice, coming back to you, I wondered if you could tell us how Girlguiding is using its clout and its platform as a large national charity to drive positive change in responding to the climate and environmental crises.
So our response to the crisis really comes in two ways: response by individual change and systemic change. So if we start with individual change, by raising awareness, by educating, by providing know-how and agency, we think that we have the possibility to enable a shift in individual behaviors for girls who are in guiding and for volunteers as well. And if you think about it, we have 300,000 girls each year in guiding. So if each one of them is shifting their individual behavior, then they can have an influence on their peers, their friends, their family. So I think it's an incredible power or influence that we have here to disseminate change. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is that the girls in guiding are advocating for change at a more systemic level, and they're calling for changes in policy. So this year they're asking for the government to take into account the voice of young people when deciding on policy changes. They're asking for the impact of fast fashion on the environment to be better known and easier to spot for the customer. And they're asking for a more equal access to outdoor spaces. So our ambition is to empower girls and young women to influence and participate and drive positive change. And we're doing it, as I said, via individual and systemic influence. Maybe we think that all young people are fully aware of the climate crisis, understand it, and know what they could do to resolve it. I'm afraid this is not the case. And we shouldn't live with this preconceived idea, and hence the importance of raising awareness and education.
It's particularly important as we see in the curriculum at the moment. There is plenty of room for improvement in what young people of all ages are being taught about how the environment is changing around them and what the opportunities might be. And particularly, we could see a lot more improvement in some of the things that I'm sure Girlguiding talk to young people about, including what they want to do when they leave education, what kind of jobs are open to them, and are opening up their minds to new ways of thinking about things that they might not have considered doing before. Particularly young girls tend to get involved a lot less in science and technology, don't they, Bernice? So I'm sure those kinds of conversations happen in Girlguiding.
It is very sad to see that young women are underrepresented in green jobs in the same way that they are in STEM. So there is a relationship. We would like to contribute to reducing this gender inequality.
And going back to the policy side of things and the desire amongst your members to make sure that young people have got a loud voice when it comes to communicating with government and pushing for the changes that they would like to see. How are you doing that at the institutional level?
At an institutional level, we have a group of advocates who are delivering this message to government institutions, and we're working a lot in partnership with other organizations. You will have seen probably our manifesto for the now government, and we've also contributed and signed other organizations' manifestos.
Then, digging into your strategy, you mentioned that carbon reduction is a core pillar. I wondered how high emitting an organisation Girlguiding is and what considerations informed your decision to make that carbon reduction pledge a key part.
Several considerations. One, it does matter. Second, it's a nice aim for everyone to get behind in the organisation. And third, we should be a role model. And this ambition to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2040 is very much in synergy with the three other pillars: raising awareness, changing society, delivering eco-guiding. Now, how have we come up with this 2040 reduction of 50%? First, and it has not been easy, we have mapped our carbon footprint across the entirety of Girlguiding and across all our activities. And you will probably not be surprised, but most of our emissions are indirect. So what you would call scope 3. And they're indirect, related to the travel to and from the unit, to the international travel, to the activities that we're doing within the unit meeting, and to our trading activities. That's why we can't really focus only on scope 1 and 2 reduction, and we aim for a reduction across the full spectrum, direct and indirect. Then, having done this mapping exercise, which was both a combination of calculation and estimation, we thought we needed to set ourselves a target which would be realistic and stretch. So looking at the possible interventions, we thought that 50% reduction was that target. We prefer to express it as a reduction rather than net zero because it's clearer for our members. And lastly, you were talking earlier about agency. We would like to give local units and guiding agency in deciding how they want to reduce carbon footprint. And they might decide to go on an international trip not as far away as they used to, or they might decide to go by train rather than plane. We think it's not for the Girlguiding Association to decide it. What we can do is equip them with what they need to make an informed decision.
That's really interesting that you're leaving it sort of open to the units to decide how they want to help the organisation achieve this aim. I think that there's a lot to be said in terms of agency for that. And it leads on to another question I was going to ask. Is there a trade-off as you seek to reduce your carbon footprint? You mentioned overseas trips, maybe going somewhere closer to home or switching your transportation methods. So I'm just curious to know whether that's something that Girlguiding has considered, what the trade-off might be or what that might look like for individual units.
There are trade-offs. I would rather call them choices, maybe. And yes, in the short term, you might feel, oh, am I facing a choice between increased cost and increased sustainability? But it's only in the short term. If you take the long-term vision, do you really have the choice but to drive towards an organization that is more sustainable and contributes to greater environmental sustainability? I don't think so. So yes, there will be choices at local level, and we give agency to them. There are choices at the association level. And for example, when it comes to our uniforms, we are making choices to make it more environmentally friendly at the moment and exploring an avenue around circular fashion. And I would like as well to insist on the benefits. By becoming a more environmentally friendly organizations, we will attract more girls, more members. I think we should contrast it to the option of not doing anything, in which case we would lose relevancy as an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Liz, on this carbon reduction consideration and whether charities should really be investing time and potentially resources into reducing their carbon footprint, I know that there have been a number of organisations, particularly smaller ones, which have decided that it's just not worth their while because the impact that would have on the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is just not worth it. What's your view on that? And how do you sort of balance that consideration with the more sort of desire for inclusion and sense of agency that Berenice was referring to, of making people feel like they are making an impact through these differences in their choices?
It's a very good question, and something that a lot of charities and funders are grappling with at the moment. My perspective would be that all charities, and to some extent that's particularly charities focusing on social issues, all charities need to be thinking about how they can play their role in accelerating climate action. And that's both mission and emissions. The two are not mutually exclusive. Thinking about a charity's direct impact on the environment, yes, absolutely, that will be proportionate in many ways to the size of the organisation. And we are a sector of the majority of very small organisations, many that don't even have staff, never mind an office or any other assets with heavy carbon footprints. So for those organisations, it's important to understand the impact that we're all having on the environment and to make some tweaks to lessen our impact. But it's not necessarily a good use of time and resource for those small organisations to get tangled up in the measurement of carbon footprints. You can still make positive change just by understanding where it's more likely that you could make a difference. But then the majority of charities of all shapes and sizes, in the main, can make a bigger difference through their mission than their carbon emissions. And that's for a number of reasons. One, charities already work with the people who are most impacted by environmental change in the UK. So particularly younger people, older people, people from ethnic minority communities, disabled people, those living in poverty or with health conditions in particular. So being in a position of trust and understanding, working with those groups already, secondly, places charities in a really strong position to help to raise their voices, raise their needs and concerns, help them to engage in deciding what the priorities should be for charity action, but also for wider societal action, and to ensure that everybody in the country has a say in decisions that are affecting their lives as we tackle increasingly environmental and climate change. And if environmental action is going to build a healthier, fairer and more sustainable future for everyone, whatever policies and action we take forward has to work for everybody.
So coming back to the strategy that you have just developed, were there any costs associated with it, and how did you decide how they would be funded, if so?
Some costs can be included in our operational cost. For example, when we develop the Girlguiding award, it's effectively not in replacement, but it's part of the operation cost of Girlguiding. Some cost will be paid by an investment we're making from our transformation fund into the environmental strategy. And to start with, we've decided to allocate over 10% of our transformation fund to the implementation of the environmental strategy, and it might increase over the years. This, however, leaves a funding gap, and we are very much hoping that we can get external funding for this very important cause.
What is the most expensive element of the strategy?
So one that would be extremely expensive is to assess all buildings that Girlguiding owns all over the country. If you imagine a surveyor going to each one of those and formulating recommendations, and for those recommendations to be followed, then yes, we're talking massive investment.
And you may not know this figure off the top of your head, but do you know how many buildings roughly Girlguiding owns across the country?
We are into hundreds. And if your question is, what is the cost I'm talking about? We are talking more than $1 million.
And there is a gap in funding, and that is not exclusive to Girlguiding. I think you'll agree, Liz, right? There is a problem about who is going to pay for charities' work in the environmental space, particularly where their mission may not directly, explicitly relate to environmental concerns.
Yes, absolutely. And as well as being a question for our sector, it's a wider question in the UK as a whole. How are we going to make the changes we need to all of our buildings, including our homes? Within charities, this work at the moment is being funded in the same combination of ways that charity work is generally paid for, which does include often a significant amount of grants from philanthropy, from funders. And we're seeing some really positive shifts in that landscape at the moment. Increasingly, both social and environmentally focused funders are increasing the grants available to charities. Many are also offering other forms of support. Perhaps that's access to training courses or advice. All of that is very welcome. But notwithstanding those positive shifts, you're absolutely right, there's still insufficient funding. The latest research from the Environmental Funders Network, and there's new research due out very soon, but the last report said that there's less than 6% of UK trust and foundation funding goes to all environmental issues. That's an extremely small amount of money, particularly when you think about it in relation to the scale of the changes that we're needing to make in society. So it's really important for all funders, not just environmental funders, to step up and play their part. And as we were saying earlier, the cost of inaction is much greater.
And from where you're sitting, is it really that simple? Just put more money into addressing the environmental crisis? Or could there be some funders listening to this saying or thinking it's really easier said than done?
It's a good challenge, and life always has its complications. There are many things that would be needed to support getting more money out there to the front line, including the infrastructure in the sector to make sure that we're not duplicating effort and that we are sharing, learning and replicating what works. But the bottom line is we already know what needs to change in order to address the climate crisis. We have the technologies to do that. It's now just a case of making that happen. And charities have a role in ensuring that policymakers are held to account in their role, as much as encouraging funders to support their little chunk of the jigsaw, not to mention the work that we've already talked about making sure that the right voices are involved in those decision-making processes. So together we're spending what limited money we have in a really effective way.
And I think it's interesting there, Liz, that you're discussing the charity sector as a whole and together. That's the key word there, right? So Berenice, I'm curious to know how you're collaborating with other organisations in your environmental work.
We have collaborated from the start. When designing the strategy, we've been part of everyone's environment that NPC is leading. It's been great in that it provided us with a wealth of information and literature review that was absolutely necessary for us to be evidence-based. We're continuing to collaborate and will do more when implementing the strategy. We're in contact with various organizations when it comes to training, education, development of badges, for example, development of the Girlguiding Awards. What I would say is that I feel there is, if not a divide, not yet full collaborations between the youth sector in general and environmental charities. And I think we need to find ways to foster more collaboration across those two sectors.
And Liz, it's obviously not an easy feat to bring together lots of different organisations, often working in extremely disparate areas, to collaborate effectively in this massive problem that really needs to be solved. What, in your view, are the main barriers to cross-charity collaboration in environmental work?
Well, as a starting point, we know that charities are natural collaborators, which is a really strong foundation for us all to work from. There are programs like the MPC Run Everyone's Environment programme. There are also many others operating in this space, trying to engage social and environmental conversations together. For example, Warm This Winter, Crack the Crises. There are many more. There's still plenty of room for improvement in how social issue and environmental issue focused charities and funders collaborate with each other as well as within their own subsectors. And that's what programs like Everyone's Environment, MPC, are seeking to do. And there's plenty of information on MPC's website if you'd like to see the research reports that Berenice was talking about that helped Girlguiding on their journey. In terms of barriers, collaboration takes time and resource, and both are in short supply. So I'd encourage charities to talk to their funders. We need to move as a sector to enabling collaboration to be standard. And at the moment, our funding system often puts us more in competition than actively in collaboration, although we are seeing shifts in the right direction. We're tackling now complex systemic issues, and they're not going to be achieved in silos. So breaking down those silos little by little, as we're starting to do, is going to play big dividends further down the line. And one small practical step that charities can take now is to engage with one of the coalitions already there, like Everyone's Environment, to access shared learning and resources free of charge, to engage with organisations that they might not otherwise come across.
And Berenice, were there any other big challenges that you encountered and had to overcome as you were internally developing your environmental strategy?
Yes, I think we had several challenges. Access to data, data for the carbon footprint mapping, but also data around the gendered impact of the climate and our environmental crisis. Then we had to overcome the question of cost versus ambition. We had to overcome the challenge around taking into account everyone's opinion in a membership organization. And I think, as I explained before, not all young people believe the climate crisis is important, the vast majority of them, but we had, in developing the strategy, to take into account everyone's point of view.
And do you have any tips for other charities who are currently developing their environmental strategies, bearing in mind all of the challenges that you just mentioned, maybe ways that they can themselves navigate that?
I would say always connect back to your mission. We did a lot of thinking around how the climate crisis intersect with Girlguiding mission and vision for the world. Listen to others. We were very privileged to have several charities talking to us about their journey and the difficulty they had and how they overcome the challenges. It's been invaluable. And my last tip, bring passion. Have a few people and champions. Have a few people who can champion this work and this strategy at all levels in the organization. And again, here we had a few trustees in Girlguiding who are absolutely passionate and committed to resolving the environmental crisis. And that's made a lot of difference. So these internal champions can really help you.
Yeah, make the most of the natural enthusiasm from certain corners. Liz, is there anything that you would add in terms of top tips for other charities who are on the road of developing their environmental work and direction?
I'd add specifically a message to all the social issue focused charities listening and say, wherever you are on your journey, take your next step. Be brave, be bold. You don't have to get your house in order before having legitimacy to engage with topics that affect every one of our lives. You don't have to be an environmental expert. Your existing expertise and knowledge added to the mix is essential in ensuring that environmental action improves all of our lives.
What a lovely note to end on. Liz Gadd and Berenice Levenez, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now we move on to Charity Changed My Life, in which we bring you the stories of people whose lives have been transformed for the better thanks to the work of Charities. This week, we hear from Darryl Ray, who so valued the support she received from Weston Park Cancer Charity in Sheffield that she set up a choir.
In 2018, I was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. I was treated at the Weston Park Hospital in Sheffield, where I went through chemotherapy, surgery and radiotherapy. The Weston Park Cancer Charity had a support centre where I received counselling when needed, therapies like reflexology, etc. when needed, and also things like the Look Good, Feel Good courses where, especially for the ladies, when you've lost hair, you've lost your eyelashes, you've lost your eyebrows, you've lost your fingernails, experts will come in and teach you how to put your makeup on correctly and just making you feel like you did pre-cancer, because you're never the same again, and people who've gone through this process will agree with that. Contacting them and taking advantage of all the support they had to offer was absolutely integral in my recovery. They gave me so much confidence that I'd lost, and I think that is the biggest thing for me, getting my confidence back when I felt so lost after being treated. I went to see if I could become a volunteer to help give back. And whilst I was there, I asked if they had a choir that I could join because I did love singing. They said, no, we haven't. And I asked, well, would you like me to set one up? And with the help of two of my friends, we proceeded to set that up. So it was a brand new choir. And we sing in big theatres, churches, weddings, festivals, in the street, singing in the rain, singing in the cold. The major thing is that you are together with people who've gone through the same journey as you have, or they have got loved ones who have been through that journey. So we understand when we're waiting for scan results. We don't talk about the cancers, but that we're there if we need each other when we're going through difficulties. And that's a really, really special bond. I've seen people who came into the choir, they're putting their makeup and lipstick on to go on ITV calendar on the television. And 6 months before, I'd seen abject fear in those ladies' eyes when the cancers had come back. So the choir has had an enormous impact on me and the choir members.
That was Darryl telling us about how the Weston Park Cancer Charity changed her life for the better. And if you'd like your organisation to be featured in Charity Changed My Life, we'd love to hear from you. All it takes is a short voice message from someone who has benefited from your services. You can find details of how to get in touch with me in the show notes to this episode. And that's it for this week. We'll be back again next week. In the meantime, please do follow us on the podcast platform you use. And if you'd like, leave us a rating. It really does help us. But for now, thank you to our guests, Berenice and Liz. Our producer is Nav Powell.